History and Biography is sponsored by Wells Fargo.
Hi, I am Lisa Lucas, Director of the National Book Foundation, and I'm extraordinarily excited to welcome Jenna Bush Hager to the National Book Festival. She is the anchor of the fourth hour Today Show, and we love watching her every morning, and I love working with her, and I'm obsessed with the Read with Jenna book club. Today, we're going to be talking about her new book, Everything Beautiful in Its Time, which made me cry. It did. Oh my goodness. It totally made me cry, Jenna.
So Lisa, I have such a admiration and really a girl crush on you. I got to talk with you for the Today Show a couple of years now, which I can't even believe, about books. And it was one of my favorite conversations.
Let's talk about your book to start with. I mean, this book it probably was a very difficult book to write. As a person who's recently experienced, a close family member passing away, this was really a love letter, I think, to your grandparents, it felt like. And what does it mean to write these stories after losing people who are so important to you?
Well, it really started as I lost my three remaining grandparents, my grandparents on my dad's side, and then also my grandmother, whom I'm named after, Jenna Welch. She was from Midland, Texas, and she lived in the same house my grandpa built her whole life until she had to move into a retirement community. I lost all three of them in a span of 13 months. And it started really as journal writing. I'm sure you found when you lose someone, whatever helps you get through it is what you should do, and I would write about things so that I wouldn't feel so lonely, so that I had somebody to talk about, had somewhere to process these feelings. And then what was different really about this was that I was publicly grieving. My grandparents were public personas and people saw them as the way they saw them, whether that had to do with politics or personal stories they had with them, or, people would say, oh, your grandma always reminded me of my grandma, that type of thing. But They were very, my relationships with them could look very different than that. And so I started digging a little bit about what they meant to me, but also I read, for example, an article written by a man who got to be with my grandmother towards the end of her life, and they had a really personal conversation about gay rights, about transgender rights. And at the end of the lunch, a couple weeks later, he received a letter that said, from my grandmother, "Thanks for our lunch. You changed my mind about things." And so I wanted to meet him. I wanted to talk with him. I just missed them so much that I knew there was going to be a tear. I didn't realize it'd be so soon. That I wanted to explore what they meant to me. And so it was personal, and I'm a little nervous for it to come out because now it's been it was delayed, and it's been so long that, it was raw and authentic, and it is a love letter, and it's also an exploration of my relationship with these three people that shaped me very much.
It's also an exploration of you. I mean, it's like you're basically revisiting the moment that you had your children and how they first met your grandparents, and what sort of generational things are passed through. Like, what was your grandmother that became your parents, that became yours, and become your children? I mean, you're really looking at 4 generations of a family. And it seems like you're parsing that as well. How did that feel to sort of like really look at like where, maybe your grandma started to where your daughter is, what's the link?
Well, it's I think in a lot of novels, I'm so interested in generational stories and the stories of those who've come before us and how they shape us in the good and the bad and the beautiful and the tragic, And one of the things that I found so heartbreakingly beautiful about watching my grandparents age and grow old and unable to walk was the juxtaposition of these new babies that I had. Their hands without sunspots next to my grandfather's that were covered. Their optimism too. I mean, they didn't realize sitting next to these people that were clearly, on their last summer, soaking up their last moments of life, that they were dying. And I think particularly now when we've been locked away and the world is at such a fragile state, the optimism of our babies, of our children, those who, the mind, but also some kids that I've interviewed that are marching and using their voices, even when they feel like their voices aren't being heard. That's what brings me hope. And so there is that exploration of what they've gotten from them, but also just that sense that life continues to go on and that children really see the best in people. And that I felt like was such a comforting thing for me, for my kids, after when I was alone with Mila when my grandmother died, and she came and brought me a stick figure picture she drew and said, now you'll always have her. And I think that sense of optimism is something that we have to have hope in something. And I choose to have optimism and hope in the future of our children.
And there's a lot in the book about you becoming your own woman, like beyond, sort of what they were and what your children are. I mean, in real time, you're becoming you. Your childhood relationship with the press, growing up as the child of politicians, becoming your own professional, working harder than maybe you even needed to so that you could prove that you were a different human. Like, did it help you to crystallize some of the choices you've made and who you are by just writing these stories and thinking about the lessons and your takeaways, your interpretations of those?
I mean, definitely. And one of the things that's so interesting that my grandmother always said was like, don't believe everything you read. And I think she meant, that sometimes she was criticized a lot for her letting her hair go gray, like silly things that I think she found to be so, she said, boring. But, I think even some of the things they just repeatedly said, I've contextualized, it's my own thoughts of it. Like, we live in a world where people are so easily critical. There's things that are said. And so when I hear her, that was actually one of the last things she said to my sister Barbara and me when we called to tell her goodbye. She said, well, I may not be dying. Like, don't believe, she was just trying to comfort us, but don't believe everything you read. And I think so often we are compartmentalized into a headline or the daughter of, all of us are not always explored as our full being. And especially now when social media and the world is so connected, which is such a beautiful thing, but everything is so fast that sometimes it's hard to really know anybody, to sit down with somebody and know who they are, other than just who they come from, who their family is. Right. There's more to life than that. And so, yes, that was something that I explored and I explore in this book, and something I will always, and I think all of us, no matter who our parents are, have to explore who we are, on our own, what we believe, what we stand for, how we will use our voice. And both of my grandmothers, actually, because I come from a family of people and people you don't, use their voices in very different ways. They had, even just the sound of their voices were so different. My grandma Jenna had a West Texas tang. She was probably quieter, but she used her voice. And I think as women, or as for me, I want to learn what that means for me. And that's definitely in this book. I think it's something we all probably think about for the rest of our lives.
One thing I was struck about, sort of your grandmother's traditionalism, right? Sort of known to be very traditional, but also just encouraging you sort of maybe do something different than she might have advocated in her young life or,
Yeah.
I mean, it's the tension between what your individual life looks like and your, familial life looks like and the public life looks like was such an interesting tension. And it was so curious to see moments where, you know, family members sort of flouted what you might have thought, where your father runs you over with a giant fish and take a picture, or or your grandmother sort of said, well, don't worry about, something that you might have thought I was worried about.
Yeah.
How does that tension make you, you?
I think my grandmother was definitely thought of as one way, and that's because of some of the things she said, some of the things she did. I mean, she definitely chose a life of being the wife of somebody. She chose that life and she loved it, and she chose to be, have all these kids and be this matriarch, really. But I also think, and there was obviously that famous graduation speech she gave. But I also think when I really examined her life, I mean, she evolved. And I think one of the most important things we can do as humans is allow ourselves to grow and to change. And as I told you, I read this article in the Atlantic about this man who went to lunch with a mutual friend, went out with my grandmother, and he's gay, and they talked about gay rights, and she was in agreement, and they had this great lunch. And then towards the end they started talking about transgender rights, and my grandmother was 90, and she was really just was like questioning him on his stance and wondering what it meant and all of this. And I'm sure, and he didn't, I met with him, and he told me that she was a little bit bewildered and curious, and kind of was like, well, I don't know if I believe that. And at the end of the lunch, he felt bad because he just thought, why did I, fight with a 90-year-old woman about this? Why did I push? And then, as I said, several weeks later, he got a letter in the mail. And he said, you were right. You changed my views.
Incredible.
And I just thought, when I read that, that one, so many people are afraid to change. So many people can't, want to be right so much that they can't even hear what the other people are saying. And if a 91-year-old woman, who was in the last stage of her life can listen at a table with somebody that may differ from them and have her mind changed, like what if we all could have a little bit of that in us? I feel like our world would be a more peaceful place. So I got to examine that. I think people are more complicated than how we think of them. And my grandparents surely were more two-dimensional than I think some people might think.
No, I mean, I feel like it is so lovely to sort of hear the family side of your life, after all of us grew up, sort of seeing professional side of your family. So your own journey, right, has always involved books and teaching. And so I just want to kind of just go back and sort of first talk a little bit about like the books that formed you and like how you became a reader and how you became a teacher. Baltimore, right?
Yeah, Baltimore and DC. Well, I always wanted to be a teacher. And I loved to read as a little girl. I loved the act of it. And I think I had readers on both sides of my family. I mean, all of my family really were readers, and so it's in my DNA. I don't know if it's like because they modeled it or it's because it's just something that I love. But my grandmother, Jenna, never traveled very much. I think she maybe left the country once. She was from West Texas. Like her trips were driving to Ruidoso, New Mexico with my grandpa. But she was such a reader and a naturalist. And she got National Geographic magazines and dreamed of the places that she would never get to go to. And so I saw that. And then my mom was a librarian. I think she was really shaped by my grandmother. And she was an only child who had a sisterhood of friends who are still to this day her best friends. But really, she found companionship in books. And I think I mean, I have a twin. I'm the luckiest. I have somebody who was my constant companion and my cheerleader and my audience. um, but I also saw what reading can do, how it can take you to different places. And I saw that as a reader, and the books that shaped me. I mean, now Mila's reading, my oldest is reading The Babysitter's Club. I devoured that whole series.
Loved The Babysitter's Club. Oh my God.
It's just was, and I don't know if you read that New York Times article about how it taught them everything they needed to know about literary fiction. I'm like, me too.
Yeah, same.
Loved The Babysitter's Club. We loved Little Women. It was a book that we constantly sort of, my grandma read to my mom, then my mom read to us, and then we read alone. We loved Anne of Green Gables. We loved to read mysteries, you know, like the R.L. Stein type books that would scare you, and then you could just laugh about
Christopher Pike.
Oh, I loved Christopher Pike. We're probably similar ages.
Ever.
I still remember one Christopher Pike book that took place in the ocean, and they go down. I don't know if you remember.
Those books were the best.
Christopher Pike was great. And then I think what happened is my mom led us to some more profound books the older we got, maybe 6th, 7th grade. Sandra Cisneros, The House on Mango Street. I was living in Texas. She's a Texas author. And, you know, that book, I've read it now multiple times because I also taught it in 6th grade. And every time I read it, I get something different from Esperanza. I feel something different from her. And it was so much fun as a teacher in in Baltimore is where I taught that book, to watch my kids relate to Esperanza, but also to see something different in her than I did.
Right.
And obviously Esperanza means hope in Spanish. Like they found her life to be hopeful. Yeah. They found the same optimism in her life that they do in theirs. So I started questioning things, you know, Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye, that book changed me in so many ways because I had never seen the world from those eyes, from that view. Right. And it made me realize that there's so much work to be done. And so then, I taught in inner city DC and then also West Baltimore. And I taught English and I loved it. I think I'm still happiest in the classroom.
Well, you are kind of teaching now, right? You've got, and in your own way, you know, you've got a book club, and this book club is like, it's really successful, and people are reading these books. There's a medallion on the, you know, on the cover. What is that? Like, why did you start it? And like, what do you want it to do?
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, in the same way that I was hoping to introduce books to my kids in classrooms that would lead into cool conversations and bring them together. That was what we were hoping to do. What I was hoping to do was to read awesome books that I would normally just recommend to my mom, my friends, my sister. I always ask you for book recommendations. I have like a little group of writers in New York that I'm like, what are you reading? So to do that same thing, but for the audience that watches our show. And I think also it was really important to me that we were highlighting authors that aren't normally highlighted all the time. Debut novelists, writers, a diverse group of writers. Our last book, The Burning, was from a debut novelist from India. And
that book is so good.
I loved that book. I mean, it broke my heart, and one of the things that I saw with my kids, with my grandmother Jenna, with me, is that I'm not going to be able to go to India right now. I've never been. I probably won't go for a while. I have 3 little kids. We're in the middle of a pandemic. But I got to go there for a little bit when I read that book. And I got to see the world through the lens of these characters whom I've never met, but I felt so much empathy for their stories. And I think that's what books do. And that's what hopefully this book club does. And I have to tell you, the readers that read with us are the coolest. They're so enthusiastic. They have this thing called Sharing Saturday where they send the books to different people around the country who can't buy them. And they ask such cool, insightful questions. So it's been a really awesome part of my job.
The book club, it's going super well, and you're picking all these incredible books, but we're in this moment of like needing to connect. And I feel like people forget that books are social, that these ideas are things that we're discussing. I mean, God, the book groups right now, given the state of the world, people are really, really diving into some really sophisticated conversations. It's like college again. But what kind of conversation do you want to generate with Read with Jenna?
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that, because in the beginning of the pandemic, probably 6 weeks in, we had a conversation with Lily King, who wrote Writers and Lovers, and our book club and me. And I wept, and I cry easily, but I wept because the community that I felt with this writer who I so admire, and these women, they were all women, but these women who were reading her words, and the conversations we had around grief and love and finding our voices as women were so different than my day to day. My day to day at that point was about logistics and homeschooling and children and diapers and work. So to have the freedom to talk about these things, that to have a platform to talk about these things too, right? Like a jumping off point, because books are really that. They're the catalyst for conversations. They're the start of a way to talk to people that you may not even know. I had never met any of these people before, and I met them on Zoom, and all of us were in tears because we had this platform, this way to talk about these subjects that are bigger than grocery lists, that feel more important than like the data, you know what I mean, than the day to day. And so that's what books can do. They can help bring people together. They can help us start conversations that are hard to start. And I found that with my kids. I found my husband and I reading books together and having these conversations during this time that we would never have on our own without something that helps us start the conversation. And I think starting the conversation is just part of it. But, books can do that. And to have these conversations with people from all over the country who I would never know, I would never get to really meet, I would never see walking down the streets in New York, although I'm sure we have some New York people, like to have that and to have different opinions too, which I think right now in a place that's safe to come and express them, it just feels like a really cool thing to be part of.
Your grandmother's changeability, right? The fact that 90 years old, she could have a conversation and think differently about something. Do you think that these books do the work? Do you think you'll pick books that you think can help change people's minds, or not even from one issue to the next, but just to open their minds? And do you think you're going to with that?
I mean, that's what I've done. I mean, I feel like I've read books through this process that haven't not necessarily changed my mind, but like you said, opened my mind, that have taken me to places that I may never get to go to. They have put me in the shoes and let me walk as a young girl whose father sells her for marriage in Nigeria, for example, in The Girl with the Louding Voice, one of my favorite books of the year. I've gone to Pakistan with the book A Woman Is No Man, and then to Brooklyn in that same book. I felt like the pressures that I've never felt personally, but because these authors have created characters and these places that feel so real, these characters that I want to meet, I feel like I've thought of the world as a different place. And so, yes, I hope people reading with me do that too, that it makes a little bit more empathy for people, because we live in such a global world. I hope it brings people together, and that we can walk in the shoes of people that we may never meet. And in doing that, hopefully it starts conversations and it opens people's eyes.
And thank you. You know, I think for a long time, media was not pushing books. It was like books were dead. That was not the thing that people wanted to think about. And I think the visibility where you have millions of people tuning in and seeing that we value books is huge. You feel like people value books more. There's more conversation over the past, 10 years, 5 years.
I think so. I mean, I think we've sort of always valued books. And I think maybe that was like a headline that made traction for 2 seconds. But when you talk with somebody that loves books, there's this immediate bond. There's this feeling of like, oh my gosh, we may not even have anything else in common, but like I see you and I can imagine what you were like as a little kid with a flashlight under your covers. And watching my girls turn into readers is really one of the sweetest. I mean, I want to cry, I'm crying, but watching Mila read Ways to Make Sunshine last month and her to come down and say, and read with me, read the lines, hearing her sweet little voice, like unsure in its fluency still, is just such a privilege as a mom. I mean, really is. What reading Charlotte's Web, which I forgot E.B. White's writing style. I mean, she is is it a he? I'm like, I can't remember. E.B.'s a boy, right?
I love that. Dude, just make them all women.
I make them all women.
Make them all
That's
women.
what I do.
That's like what I do. I just womanize.
I'm like, I just make them all. I'm like, who is it?
Yeah.
Anyway.
She's really lucky too to have this record of you over time. I mean, this isn't your first rodeo, right? Like this is not your first book. So there's all these books that are the evolution of Mama, right? They're going to be, as an adult reader, something that you can parse and she won't wonder as much. You know, some of the things that you might have wondered about your grandmother's life or about your mother's life, she'll have access to so much of the process of you, and she'll be quite different from you.
Yes.
And she'll be writing books explaining how she's like, we're different people.
You wouldn't believe what my mother did.
Right.
No, I mean, and I think those are conversations that anybody can have with their kids about our past and why we are the way we are, why we fail 1,000 times a day, why we feel like we're hurting sometimes, why we feel lonely. Those are things that we can do. And I do think, again, literature is a great way to start having those conversations. And when we were reading Charlotte's Web, to talk about death on the heels of losing these people, the only people that they knew that have ever died. You know, Poppy was like, "Why? So what? Charlotte's gonna die?" She heard Mila and I reading, and I was like, "Yeah, Poppy, everything dies. That's part of life."
Like the Bambi moment.
Yes, exactly. She was like, "Wait, but even tacos?" And I was like, I just love that tacos are such a big part of her childhood.
Tacos are important to me.
Right? I love a taco, but the taco could be something that she could lose and it would be heartbreaking.
Yeah. So I guess as we close up, I wonder what your favorite moment of the book is.
My favorite moment in my book. Well, one thing that I found comforting to write about was that my grandmother Barbara was, decided to put out a statement and say, I'm not going to seek comfort care. I'm going to die. I'm going to go. And we all were shocked by it. But what I love is that she was teaching, I think a lot of us are afraid of death. That's one of the things in our culture we're worried about, we have anxiety about. And she died the way she lived. Yeah. And I thought that was a really interesting way to go. And of course she did, because she was just such a force for us. Mm-hmm. And then a couple months later, when I went to my other grandmother's funeral, just the juxtaposition that there was people lining the streets of Houston, Texas, and then not far off in Midland, there were 7 of us. My dad and mom wrote the service. Right. And I said to my mom, I just said, I wonder if she was ever intimidated by her, it's not like a mother-in-law, her, what would it be called? By Danny. There's no word for it. There's no word. But I just said, I wonder if she would be intimidated by Ganny. I wonder if she was ever intimidated by this East Coast, educated, went to a boarding school in Smith and all, and my grandmother didn't finish college, my other grandmother. And she was like, no, she wasn't the type to be intimidated. And I just loved these 2 women who died in the same year in such different ways. I liked exploring their lives and what they meant to me and Barbara and I are obviously both named after them. Yeah. And how they shaped us, I thought. And I think any of us can explore those who came before us, whether it's in journal writing or conversations, or meet with them and write down ways they lived, because I think it really helps us understand who we are.
Yeah. And, your grandmother's made some incredible women. I mean, your mother founded the National Book Festival, which we are speaking at.
Yes, I know. She founded it. I remember going on the National Mall. I was 20 years old, and it was such a part of our life. I mean, I think I still am so proud of her. She started the Texas Book Festival too. She left these legacies that Mrs. Obama obviously continued in DC, and it continues to this day. It's a place where people can come and talk about books and be together. And I think she has a little message for everybody that's watching today.
Yeah. Well, just from my perspective, your book made me cry. And I think that, you've had a public life and you had to publicly grieve. And there are all sorts of external perceptions of your family and internal perceptions of your family. And I think it was a really valuable exercise to read the counter narrative of what it was like to be a girl growing up in the White House and to lose these people, that you love so much. And I think the moment that moved me the most, well, all of the moments about the strength of the women in your family moved me the most. The moment that really, really got me was when your husband stood outside in the rain and fished and fished and fished and fished so that your grandfather could see him do it. And I just thought that was family. It just felt like what a lovely group of people to love and be loved by. So
That's how I feel.